have some say in how I'm introduced. But secondly, the illustration of it is that I do a lot of things. And I'm not dissimilar from all of you, and not dissimilar from teachers in classrooms around the country that today are being asked to do a heck of a lot more, but a heck of a lot less to achieve the same or greater outcomes. So what I want to talk to you about this morning is some of the initiatives that are underway in the department, but most importantly, where you, as the voice of parents, fit into some of those discussions. And to give you an idea of how much I travel, I have been to every one of the cities that you represent in the last year and a half. So, and I will be coming back. I'll be back in Seattle, I'll be in Kalamazoo, we'll be in Starkville, we'll be in all over the place. Because we operate under the principle that the best ideas in education reform are happening in the local communities. They are happening, as a colleague of mine says, outside the Beltway. And the Beltway can easily be described as a noose around good ideas, unless we are bringing into that dialogue the voices and perspectives of people that are on the ground at the local level, whether it's teachers, or as community leaders, or as parents, making certain that the voices of value are incorporated into the discussion. Now, we heard last night from former Secretary Rod Page, who was in the office when one of the most sweeping changes in education reform began, No Child Left Behind. It is curious, but perhaps not surprising, that the current environment of systemic change is also happening under the auspices of a former local school superintendent. Arnie Duncan, who is the second local superintendent to serve as Secretary of Education, and was for 10 years the superintendent of Chicago Public Schools, also is ushering in a transition in how we think about education. So I don't think it's a surprise that the two biggest changes that we're experiencing in the dialogue of education in this country are happening through the auspices of secretaries that were formerly at the local leadership level, and bring with them the experience of sitting in discussions with parents, with community leaders, with teachers, with legislators, who really drive what happens in education. How many of you have this picture at home? Or you have it of your children, or your grandchildren, or your neighbor's children. I'm in this picture somewhere. I'm sure PPS National will give you a new car if you can figure out which one I am. Okay, maybe not. This scene is repeated every year. Around this time, a new group of students are coming into school for the first time. They're all excited about the new adventure they're getting ready to experience. Some of them come in with new lunch boxes. Some of them come in with new shoes. Some of them come in wearing the bow tie their mother had to put on for the picture. But they come in with an excitement and an expectation that the adventure they're embarking upon will be successful and launch them to the next stage of their lives. They come in excited, enthusiastic, open. And it's up to us in the education community, it's up to us in the community at large to make certain that this energetic investment of their time is not wasted. And after all is said and done, we're all in a room of adults, you interact with adults. As I heard the roundtable updates on what's going on, you're interacting with adults, but these are our customers. These are the ones that benefit from everything you do, or everything you don't do. They are the consequence of that. So the value of your voice is not just for it to be heard. The value of your voice is that it be applied. And you said last night, if not us, who? And I'll add an extension to that. If not now, when? Because we're at a critical crossroads in what decisions are being made about education. We're at a critical crossroads as it relates to teachers, as it relates to finances, as it relates to administrative oversight, as it relates to all the factors that drive this community asset we call education. And I'll use this illustration, and I use community asset deliberately, because if we don't view education as important as we do the new museum that's been funded by a local philanthropist, or the on-off ramp that's been constructed because of an economic development opportunity, we miss the whole importance of what Dr. Page said last night about the public involvement in education. I was at a community not long ago, and as you know, you open the door of your hotel room, and there's the ever-present USA Today. Well, that particular morning, it was a local newspaper. And I'm sure it was, other people saw this as well, but it certainly got my attention. On the front page of the newspaper, right next to each other, was one article celebrating the ribbon cutting of an on-off exit ramp that was going to revitalize the industrial park of this community, and how it was going to bring in new business, and how it was going to bring new jobs. On the very same front page was an article about how many schools were closing, how many teachers were being laid off, and what the class sizes were going to be as a consequence of that. And I'm sure I wasn't the only one that saw the contradiction in that. But unless we value education as a community asset, the same as we do any other enterprise that defines Portland or Kalamazoo or Starkville or any of the communities that are represented here, we miss the purpose of education, in my opinion. Education is a means to an end, not an end in itself. It's not something you do for 12 or 15 or 16 years before you get on with the rest of your life. It is, in fact, what you do to prepare for your life. Somebody mentioned last night, I think it was you again, the nation at risk. Now, I've been in education since my hair was brown and my teeth were white, so I had the opportunity to be in the space when the nation at risk was being debated, and I have several colleagues that were there as well. And I don't know if any of you have seen the report, read the report, haven't, you can go back and reread it. The most telling statement in that entire document to me was on page 5, where it says, if an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. As it happens, we have allowed this to happen to ourselves. This was in 1983, more than 25 years ago. We saw then that there were issues that needed to be addressed immediately to, one, make sure we were not falling behind the rest of the world in education entrepreneurship. And by that I mean taking the innovative steps that would continue to maintain or expand how we did teaching and learning in this country, how we prepared new teachers, how we provided professional development to other teachers, how we engaged the voices of all stakeholders in the discussion. It was a blue ribbon committee. The report was delivered to then Secretary of Education Ted Bell, and we thought this was the red alert. This was going to be the document that would revitalize the education discussion, that would renew the enthusiasm about how what we did mattered, how what you do mattered. There's a group of wolves howling at the moon, one looking at the other saying, my question is, are we making an impact? Takes a while, doesn't it? It's early, I know.
It is early.
6 o'clock in Portland.
Yeah.
We can spend our time howling at the moon. I think Dr. Page used last night Einstein's definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over each time expecting a different result. We can howl at the moon and not know if we're making an impact. So here we are more than 25 years later. And where we are is, on average, between 25 and 27% of our high school students drop out before they get their high school diploma. Now, you're all parents. Some of you are involved in a variety of different responsibilities in your home communities. If you are in business, think what would happen to your productivity if a third of your employees decided not to come to work next week. Or a third of your customers decided not to buy from you anymore. Or if you're in ministry, a third of your congregation chose to go to a different church. Or if you're in volunteer work, a third of your volunteers chose to sit down. we allow that to happen in our education system every day. And 25 to 27% is just an average. While there are a lot of great things going on, and Dr. Page talked about it last night, there are also places where we are in deep, deep, deep trouble. Where 50 to 60% of the high school kids never graduate from high school. To put it in stark context, 10 kids start as their freshman year, only 4 walk across the stage 4 years later. I'll even give 5 years later to get their high school diploma. We find this out after they're gone. And the impact that has on us as a society, and not to sound too cliche, but maybe that's the person that we allowed get away as the person that had the potential to find the cure to cancer, or the next engineering miracle, or the next medical breakthrough, or the next opera. We've lost that potential, and it will be very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult for us to get that potential back, because we've lost their trust. We've not created the environment where kids feel it's valuable for them to stay in school because no one will allow them to fail. Not just the teachers in the classroom, not just the people in the building, but the people in the community. Parents, community leaders, faith leaders, business leaders, where it matters to everyone that kids graduate. Now let's put it in a more real context. What can you do in this world without a high school diploma? You used to be able to, the occupations that were taken by kids that dropped out of school were fast food restaurants, working in oil change places, maybe getting a job in a large department store or a Walmart or something like that. But if you've been to any of those places recently, you find that those jobs are occupied by people who look more like me and look more like kids. Because in the struggling economy, adults are looking for second and third jobs to make ends meet that they didn't have to do before. So even that avenue of opportunity, if it's an opportunity, are closed off to kids that choose not to finish high school. Only 40% of our adult learners have a 2-year or 4-year degree. That means we're not even modeling as an adult what it's important for our kids to achieve. That post-secondary education matters. Whether it's a 1-year, 2-year, or 4-year institution, it provides that continued context to the content that allows what we've learned to be applied. In the medical field, they call that internship, where you have to demonstrate that you understand what you've learned by applying it in an environment where it works. Some of that is done in high school, but a lot of it is done in post-secondary education. Technical schools, community colleges, institutions of higher learning. 30 to 40% of those who go on to a 4-year program need remediation. Now here is a challenge to us in education. We talk a lot about closing the achievement gap, and that's a very real separation between the haves and the have-nots. But we also have to close the education transition gap. By that I mean, if a student, you say that the teacher that influences your son or daughter the most convinces them to stay in high school and get their high school diploma. Big accomplishment. Maybe against all odds. You have influenced them in such a way that they have seen the value of staying in school, and you demonstrated to them that college matters. So they walk across the street to the local community college or the local college, and they're met with good news and bad news. First, the good news. You have that high school diploma. You are now entitled to enroll in this university. The bad news is you're not ready to do college level work, so we're going to have to put you in 6 months of remedial education before you can really get rolling. If I'm the student, I say, well, wait a minute. What's this high school diploma mean? Doesn't the high school diploma mean I've met the state standards? Well, yes, but their standards are different than ours. And part of the challenge that we face in education is making certain that there is a better connection between those two distinct entities of our education community. Now, we've started doing that with some of the work that we've done with higher standards expectations in math and language arts. Some call it the Common Core standards, some call it other things. But we've tried to develop a closer collaboration, a closer connection between K-12 and higher education, so that the transition is not easy, but it is more fluid. That the high school diploma actually means an important academic transaction moving into post-secondary education. Because I've seen some of the anecdotal data, and those students that we are encouraging to stay in high school to move on into post-secondary, one of them told me that was the biggest lie they were told in school. That they were ready for college. Well, the college didn't think so. So part of it is, I don't know, I guess in all of our lives there are silos that kind of separate what we do, and as long as our silo is working okay, or our smokestack is working okay, everything is fine. And K-12 says it's the university's problem, higher ed says it's the K-12 problem. Well, we've got these smokestacks, and I'm not suggesting that we can in any way merge these systems, but we can bend them enough that we can commingle the ideas that benefit the students. Those kindergarten kids that are now ready to go to college and are expecting the same quality of opportunity as they enroll as freshmen in college as they did when they were enrolling as kindergarten students. The United States ranks 17th out of 29th among 15-year-olds in science performance. Now, science is not country specific. An atom is an atom is an atom is an atom, whether you're in the United States, Thailand, Singapore, Russia. H2O is the same formula for water, no matter how many different languages that word is translated into. '24th out of 29th in math among 15-year-olds. If you were to walk out, and as you're at the House of Blues tonight, those of you that are going, walk up to any person and say, where do you think the United States ranks in math? I'm sure you won't do this because the environment won't be that, but if the Spirit moved you, where the United States ranks in math in comparison to the rest of the world, I wonder how many of them would say 24. That's not in our DNA. That's not in our country's education description of ourselves. Yet, as was said in The Nation at Risk, we have allowed this to happen to ourselves. Back in the early 90s, we were 17th out of 29 in math. We're not getting better. The rate of college completion for 25 to 34-year-olds is 10th in the world. Now, the good news in that is in September, we were 11th. So we're making progress. But when I was in college, we were the #1 nation in the world per capita of college graduation. We are not that anymore. Higher education matters, whether it's a 1-year, 2-year, or 4-year experience. Will everyone go on to a 4-year institution, University of Texas, or University of Michigan, or Mississippi State, or Portland State, or University of Oregon, or any of the, maybe not. But the application of post-secondary experience provides to kids a context to apply what they've learned. It allows an opportunity for kids to embed what they've learned so that they can apply it. And if education is anything, it's about making certain that students have the information they need to make an appropriate choice about what to do with their future. All said and done, there is no program or policy that can substitute for a parent who is involved in their child's education from the first day possible. We can come up with race to the top 1, race to the top 2, race to the top 100. We can provide funding for school improvement grants. We can put funding out for investing in innovation. We can fund early learning challenge programs. We can put all kinds of money into the system. But I would argue with you that money, not deny that. But if money were the solution, then local districts that are spending in the 5 figures per student would have the highest achievement in this country. We don't have that. Money is a factor, but it is not the reason that we're facing such challenges in education. This is what Arnie said, National PTA, last summer. My vision for family engagement is ambitious. I want all parents to be real partners in education with their children's teachers from cradle to career. In this partnership, students and parents should feel connected, and teachers should feel supported. Now, a couple things about Arnie that, one, he's a father of 2 children, both of them go to public schools. Member of the PTA. I'm a member of the PTA. Donuts for dads. I was there. Bought the donuts. So there's an intrinsic understanding of what we experience as parents because we are parents. And I have been sitting, now, as I said, I've been in this profession a long time, but I've sat in parent-teacher conferences where I didn't understand a word the teacher told me. And I know the lingo. It's about making certain that our ownership in this enterprise is respected, but also reflected in our actions. And sometimes, as I've learned, the most important thing to bring to a discussion on education reform for parents is your own chair, because sometimes there's not one there for you. So, like any good bureaucracy, we've come up with a blueprint. Now this is a little, the photograph, I don't think that young girl there has graduated college yet. It's about an 8-month-old document. But this was our effort to put forward some of the changes that were needed in a reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which you may know more commonly as No Child Left Behind, to bring it to the 2011 era. The No Child Left Behind statute has been around since, well, for 12 years, a while. And we've learned some things from No Child Left Behind. Some good things, some not so good. We've learned one thing, importantly, disaggregating the information matters. Before No Child Left Behind, we would go to a school system and they'd say, hey, 80% of our kids are doing great. And until we started looking who represented the other 20%, we all thought that too. Once we started disaggregating those data, however, we found that those kids that were being unserved or underserved were students of color, students with disabilities, students of cultural backgrounds that don't fit our expectations. And that's intolerable. If, as was said repeatedly last night, all means all, it includes that 20% that have historically been underserved or unserved. But we've also learned that through No Child Left Behind, there has been a consequential shift in how teachers teach and how students learn. If you visit as many schools as I do, you may walk into a school someday where it's test preparation week. Right? The door is closed, the window is covered. You don't interrupt the teacher because he or she is preparing his or her students for the state exam. And that's all that matters. Right? Now, some call that teaching to the test. And in some cases, that's absolutely true. And it has evolved as we have recognized how the standards of the state have been imposed or drilled down into the local school system, where the 3 most important words that matter in every school these days are adequate yearly progress. AYP. And at the time it was implemented, it served a very important purpose of shifting the focus to outcome, that achievement mattered, that achievement was important because it was a transparent reflection of how well the school was doing. But what has happened in the intervening years is it has now become so fundamental to the definition of a school that it is all that matters. So attention to arts, attention to music, attention to history are not getting the same type of attention they deserve. Adequate yearly progress has also impacted our ability to work with kids who are at risk. Consider, if you will, this example. Fifth grader comes into class. He's reading 4 years behind grade level. For whatever reason, he's been moved along in the system. He arrives in fifth grade. His fifth grade teacher begins working with him tirelessly to bring his reading level back up to be on grade, on par with his peers. By the time the end of the year comes, that student may not be reading at the fifth grade level, but he's reading at the fourth grade level. By any reasonable measure, a substantial accomplishment. But, under AYP, nice try, but you don't get the bouquet, because he has to be reading on the fifth grade level. By some of the changes that we're proposing in the blueprint, while we would all want that student to be on grade level, that teacher and student deserve our admiration and our credit and our recognition for making that commitment. I mean, you know, I'm a former teacher. Well, I guess not, former is the wrong word. Once you're a teacher, you're always a teacher. I'm a teacher. And in this environment, we're under siege, right? We're responsible for everything, for the oil spill in the Gulf, to LeBron James signing with the Miami Heat, to the collapse of the European economies in Portugal, Ireland, Spain, Italy, and Greece. We got it all. But what we don't give up on is the kids that we work with. And the recognition that comes with knowing that we're doing our best to create an environment of progress for students is what will help revitalize the energy of our profession. Just to get off on a small tangent for a second, in the next 5 to 6 years, we can lose close to 1 million teachers to retirement. In 10 years, it will be close to 1.8 million teachers to retirement. Many of them would have retired already had it not been for a collapse in their 401ks caused by the financial calamities. I had one teacher tell me not too long ago that she is one good stock market day or one bad meeting with her principal day from walking out of the school for good. We can't afford to lose those teachers. Nor can we afford to lose the transition of our best and brightest into our profession. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Back in August, the Secretary gave a presentation at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. Historic for many reasons. Where he talked about education being the civil rights issue of our generation. And if that's true, and I believe it is, if any of us have lived through that civil rights era, we know that it was not just a clever use of words. It required commitment, it required tenacity, and it required energy. That same day, the Secretary was getting out of the car, and as he did, he grabbed his back. Now, if you've ever seen Arnie Duncan, he's about 6'100". He's a very tall guy. And in fact, that's another thing he and Dr. Page have in common. They both have athletics in their background. And they're both tall. Well, there you go. And I said, you know, Mr. Secretary, you're all right. And he said, you know, I hurt my back playing basketball. Well, we all know who he plays basketball with. He plays basketball with the, you know, first center in chief. And apparently, as he was driving the lane for a layup, he took an elbow in the back. And I said, well, you you go home after that? He said, no, you don't understand. When you play basketball at that level, you don't go home until you go hard. And it illustrates the thinking behind education being the civil rights issue of our generation. Because those of us that lived through that era knew that you had to go hard because it wasn't an easy road. It was loaded with doubters, it was loaded with counterpoints, it was loaded with a whole lot of issues that if you did not go hard, you better go home. And I believe the same in a different but similar way is what we're facing in education. You as parents cannot go home until you go hard. Now that's my boss in the front. I don't know who that guy sitting to his right is. They spend a lot of time in classrooms. The secretary was just out in Portland, Oregon. He's going to be in Cincinnati soon. He's going to be all over the country engaging in discussions with parents, with teachers, with community leaders about what works at the local level so that we can amplify the value of what makes our education system work. But we've entered, as he says, an era of new normal. New normal being having to do more with less. We can sit and wring our hands about the decline in public funding, about the decisions that are being made by legislators or city councils or county councils or school boards to cut teacher pay, cut teacher positions, close schools. Those are all tragedies. But it's a window of opportunity in some respects that we can choose to either jump into and make something happen or jump out of and leave it to somebody else to solve the problem. In an era of new normal, how we make certain that our customers, the students who, by the way, are not being laid off, are not being fired, are not being sent home without pay, they continue to come to us, and they continue to expect the quality of education that they're entitled to. How we emerge around these discussions in an era of new normal will test what value we place on education. We can look at it as a challenge, or we can look at it as a crisis. Maybe it's a little bit of both. But if we do nothing and wait it out, what we will have at the outcome at the end of that will be much worse than what was predicted in 1983 about what we've done to ourselves. So we're not standing silent. We're not just rhetoric. We're not, saying, come on, get moving. Even in this environment of challenging financial circumstances in state and local school systems, we've put some issues forward that we hope will serve as a catalyst for some changes. The first is the American Jobs Act proposal. You read about it in the newspaper every day, how it's making progress, one step forward, two steps back, one step sideways, et cetera, et cetera. What the jobs bill means for us in education is the possibility of funding close to 290,000 teacher positions that otherwise may be lost in layoffs in the next couple of years. In my introduction, it said that I was involved in ARRA, which if you have any recollection of that wondrous period, monies were put forward by the government to save teacher jobs. Our timing was off by about 6 months because in essence what we ended up doing is not generating new teachers, which we hoped we would be able to do, but basically saving the jobs of teachers that were otherwise going to be laid off and increase class sizes even further. The Jobs Act proposal for us means upwards of $35 billion for teacher jobs. And that's in addition to what funding would be available for police and firefighters. We talked last night about, I think Mr. Malthus talked about the condition of schools in Jackson without air conditioning, with kids clustering around when it started to rain. Does it surprise you to know that there are thousands of schools in this country that still exist in those conditions? I was at a school in Boston not too long ago where I walked into school and there were the large multi-gallon water containers. I thought, man, this is really smooth. You walk in, you've got crystal water dispensers everywhere. I started talking to a couple teachers and they said, we pay for that ourselves. We all contribute money and have the monthly dispensers brought. I said, well, that's great. Why do you do that? He said, because the health department was in here recently and said that our water is unsafe to drink. Now, we're not talking about a school that's been neglected and allowed to decay. We're talking about a relatively modern school in a relatively upscale community where the water can't be consumed by the students. Another school where they can't use the bathrooms because the toilets won't flush. Another school that was built right next to a leach field. Now, those of us that know anything about leach fields know that they're not the healthiest environments to hang around in, and next to the leach field was the students' playground. And we have countless examples of where investments that members of your community have made to give kids computers or laptops or iPads are jeopardized because when it rains, the roof leaks. Or they can't connect because the funding is not there for broadband. So they have the device, but no access. So we've allocated in our proposal another $30 billion that would help with infrastructure improvements. Education has historically been a bipartisan value. Regardless of my or your political beliefs, education has risen above those differences of opinion. And we're hopeful that they will continue to rise above it in this environment. Because kids don't have a 501c3, kids don't have a board of directors, kids don't have an executive director, a registered lobbyist, they have us to motivate, to encourage the kinds of action that will allow kids to succeed and have the best chance possible. Congress has been preoccupied with other legislative priorities and has not yet gotten to a reauthorization of the No Child Left Behind Act, which is the current law of the land. Even if we wanted to, we could not give blanket authority for state and local school systems to ignore the requirements of the law. That's what we do. But there is in the Act an authority for the Secretary to issue waivers that will provide state and local school systems relief from some of the requirements of No Child Left Behind that have been demonstrated to no longer be effective or to be so burdensome as they become counterproductive. The waiver authority was exercised by the Secretary a couple of weeks ago, and I know many states are already working on a waiver request that will allow them some semblance of relaxation or reconsideration of some of the No Child Left Behind responsibilities. If you are not at that table when those discussions are taking place, your voice will not be heard. You've got to be in those discussions for those to reflect not just your perspectives, but your points of view as it changes the dynamics of education reform in your state and local school systems. We've put significant money into the race at the top, 1, 2, and 3. We have 13 states now across the country that have sizable public investments to reframe and reshape the education landscape in their states. And the early results are promising. One, the Race to the Top grants were competitive awards, which is the first time in our history that we've awarded state money at such a sizable amount through a competitive application. Normally what Congress does is give us money and then they tell us how to allocate it through a formula. And we've been able to encourage states to compete, I guess, with one another, to generate their best ideas, to create the environment where legislators and business leaders and parents work together to accomplish an outcome that is relevant profitable in the education sense for their state. It's led to some very, very wonderful accomplishments already. There's one state that has tried to bridge this gap I was talking about between K-12 and higher ed by passing a law that requires any teacher that graduates from this state's institutions of higher learning as a certified or licensed teacher, if he or she comes into the school system and is not able to do what the school system needs, the school system can send that student back to the college for retraining at the college's expense. Now, I hear frequently from superintendents that as they are hiring new teachers, they are trained for jobs that no longer exist. Now, that usually boils down to discussions about how technology is applied. I mean, I've been in the classroom, you've been in classrooms too, where the teacher is not as comfortable with technology as his or her students. Yet I've also been in classrooms where teachers are using technology and, I guess in our lingo, co-opting it for education purposes. A math teacher in Fort Lauderdale that's using cell phones to do tests. She sends the questions as a text message to the students in the classroom. The students text their response back. So it takes all the mystery and all the, ooh, look what I've got that she doesn't know, that mosquito ring drives me nuts. But it incorporates the technology into the learning environment. But there are also the intangible elements of being a teacher in today's environment that we have to incorporate into our institutions of higher learning. I was at a third grade classroom in Alabama, brand new teacher. You walk into the classroom, as you would expect. It's colorfully decorated, all the ABCs, all the learning strategies, everything is a very colorful environment. I talked to her a couple of days after school started, and she was very depressed. I said, oh, what's wrong? You got a job, you got paying back your student loans, maybe that was depressing. She said, the first day of school, I invited the third graders to, we probably do this every year. What did you do over your summer? Talk to me about what you did over your summer. And she said, I was overwhelmed by the number of kids that in their way talked about one or both of their parents losing their job, losing their home, living with relatives they had never met before, not sure where they're going to be the next night because it was overcrowded at grandmom's house. There's no pedagogy that we can apply that prepares a teacher to deal with those obstacles to learning. Her comment to me was, I wasn't prepared to deal with this. I wasn't anticipating this kind of environment. And she said, if it weren't for the parents, I would not have made it through. Because it was the parents that provided the support. It was necessary for her to see beyond what the challenges were that she was facing and that she was not prepared for. So anytime you're frustrated about no one's listening to me, people are. They may not be showing you they're listening, but they definitely are. And that third grade teacher in Alabama certainly was. Early Learning Challenge Grants. I've talked a lot about our relationship between K-12 and higher education. Let me say a little bit of our relationship between K-12 and early learning. We've just been awarded $500 million, and we're in the process of soliciting applications now to build a stronger connection between preschool programs or early learning programs and K-3 programs. Ask a teacher what the hardest grade is to teach. And if they're honest with you, they will say kindergarten. Now you think, wow, give me a break. You know, cuddly kids, they're all excited, they all wear bow ties. The reason it's most difficult is because you're the first door of entry for students coming into the K-12 system. And you have no idea the background of the students that are coming into your classroom. If you're a first grade student and things don't work out, you can go yell at the kindergarten teacher because he or she didn't do what they were supposed to do. But if you're a kindergarten teacher, you don't know what the background is of the students that are coming in to kindergarten. So having the opportunity to become closer to our colleagues in the early learning environment is a critical factor in representing the interests of the kids. And this is all about making certain that kids make a better transition from an early learning environment to kindergarten so that they can come in ready to learn at an appropriate age, at an appropriate curriculum, and still allow them to be kids. We plan on funding 10 states, and we're asking those states to do very much the same as we've asked states to do with Race to the Top. Be innovative, confront what are concrete obstacles to systems change, to do assessments that allow us to know what the best early learning programs are in states. And you all represent a variety of different state efforts. There's Bright Starts, there's Smart Starts, there's Early Starts, there's a variety of different local and state early learning initiatives. We want to fund the best of those that make a strong and deliberate bridge between early learning and transition into kindergarten. Investing in innovation is probably our think tank, our entrepreneurial environment where we are supporting or incubating new ideas. We've put upwards of $800 million into efforts to identify promising practices that without that infusion of funds would never reach the point of any attention. What I've discovered, and it's not new, and it's probably not new to you, is that education at the local level is very modest, and it believes that if we're doing it, everyone else must be doing it. And that's not true. We are extraordinarily modest. We develop new ideas. We collaborate on new approaches every day. And yet we think, oh, if we're doing it, everyone else must be doing it. So what our I3 program is intended to do is elevate those ideas that no one else is doing. A math intervention, a connection between music and math, connection between language and social studies, that if we brought it to the public's attention, would have value to other communities across the country. We talk a lot about identifying best practices. We probably somewhere in this workshop, or in this conference, there's going to be a session on best practice. Am I right? Yeah. Every conference has a session on best practice. The trick is not the attendance at the session, it's what you do with the information once you leave. Because if one person's best practice is relevant to what you're experiencing, use it. When I was in school, probably it's still the case. If you borrow from one, it's considered cheating. If you borrow from many, it's considered research, so do your research. And borrow those ideas if they have value to your community. Last on this list, and there are many, many others, is our effort, just announced 2 Fridays ago, as a matter of fact, about our emphasis on teacher preparation. Back in the winter of '09 and in 2010, Secretary Duncan was pretty harsh on colleges of education. In fact, he called them institutions of mediocrity. Can't get a lot harsher than that. His point being that teachers were being prepared for jobs that no longer existed. He saw that as a superintendent in the hirings he was making in Chicago. That unless we revitalize the teaching profession and recognize that the diversity of our teachers must reflect the diversity of our classrooms, we're missing the point. There's a recent report that just came out from a study in Colorado that one of the most persistent problems in continuing the gap in achievement between the haves and the have-nots is the lack of role models of the same diverse background as the students that are not succeeding. Less than 2% of the teachers in this country are African American males. Fewer than that are Latino males. Does that reflect the composition of our classrooms? Certainly does not. And there is a cause and effect between my seeing what I can accomplish through the eyes of someone that looks like me, understands where I've come from, appreciates my point of view, and is urging me to stay in school, versus someone that has no idea where I've come from, doesn't understand my culture, my language, my experience, my stress points. And I could ask each one of you in here to close your eyes, not to go to sleep, but to remember that one or two teachers that were instrumental in your lives in making you succeed to the point you are today. It could be that teacher that urged you to accomplish something you didn't think was possible, or that person, that teacher that would not let you rest because you had more to do, or that teacher that gave you the kick in the butt when you thought it wasn't worth your time. We're drawn to those teachers because they have relevance in our lives. It could be relevance because they were the same sex, the same race, the same community, but it resonated with us because they cared about who we were. And it's that same environment that we need to have among the next generation of teachers. That they understand what the reflection of their worth is in the context of the students they teach. This is our challenge. By 2020, America will once again have the highest proportion of college graduates in the world. Now, we've not been so hot, I'll be honest with you, in reaching these goals. By 2014, all schools were supposed to be proficient under No Child Left Behind. If that holds, we will have 85% of the schools in this country not meeting AYP by 2014. That's not quite the direction we were hoping to go in. By 2020, America will once again have the highest proportion of college graduates in the world. That means by 2020, 8 million more people have to graduate from college. They're already in the system. We've got to keep them in the system, or provide them the opportunity to stay in the system so they can appreciate the value of higher education, whether that's a 2-year or 4-year program. That's a pretty big job, because somewhere along the line, college stopped mattering as a stepping stone to the choices we have available as we mature. How realistic this is depends a lot on how we transact our business going into the next 8 years, 9 years. And what motivation we provide to students, not only to keep them in high school, but to transition them into a 1-year, 2-year, or 4-year program. So I've got about 3.5 minutes left. This is our Cradle of Career agenda, where we start. And what's interesting about this, and I didn't do it horizontally because it looked cool. I did it horizontally because that's the way education works for the receivers of what we do. We may operate in vertical silos: early learning, K-5, 6, 7, 8, high school, post-secondary. But kids operate linearly. They want to see and expect the connection from one grade to the next. So by building this, this is our expectation from the studies that we've done. And our goal is that all kids will arrive to school ready to learn, and that requires that access to the $500 million that we've been allocated for early learning. Then on into elementary, well, you can read it. We want to treat teachers like professionals, shift the focus from inputs to outcomes, strengthen teacher and leader participation, equitable distribution of effective teachers, and last but not least, substantive voices of parent and community leaders. We don't exist without you, regardless of what we may say or how we may act to the contrary. So for us to have effective student achievement, we need parents, voices of leadership, community engagement, and a school environment that focuses on a world-class outcome. That's our systemic direction that we hope will align the assets we have in this community of parents. Improve student achievement, you can read all that too. great tools, great plans. On the other side, you've got 3 people that have great uniforms, great plans, great tools. But because they didn't collaborate, because they didn't communicate, the kids end up not getting the railroad track. This is I think this is symbolic of what we experience in our community every day, where there's a disconnect because we've not taken the time to sit down and talk through where we have common ground. And without that, we'll continue to operate from 2 separate ends, and when we meet in the middle, it will result in a disconnect that will not benefit kids. And I reiterate, that's why we do what we do. If you're doing it for the money, if you're doing it for the prestige, if you're doing it for the aggrandizement, you're doing it for the wrong reasons, because if you haven't noticed, we don't get much of that in education. Our payoff is what works for kids. And that's really the only payoff that matters in the profession that we're in, whether we're in the profession of parental engagement or the profession of teaching and learning. Now, everybody in this room is a parent. You may have kids in school. Your kids may have already graduated from school. You may be a grandparent of kids. You may have a neighborhood where kids are running around in the front. Regardless of where you sit, everyone in this room has a child. Everyone in this room is a parent. Everyone in this room has a commitment to kids succeeding. Your voices of leadership, your voices of concern, your commitment and passion. My request to you is that every one of you in this room has a child, and every one of you in this room has a voice. I ask that you raise both of them in support of public education. Thanks very much.